Welcome to Failing Forward. I'm your host, Mike Justice. Today's guest is Tom Derflinger. Tom is a devoted Christian and a retired cop through the Grove City Police Department. Tom talks about times when he had to compartmentalize his faith in order to do his job effectively. Tom was living well, and out of nowhere, he was diagnosed with stage 4 of melanoma. Doctors predicted he wouldn't have much longer to live, and this really challenged everything he believed. This uncertainty changed his perspective in a powerful way, and what previously challenged his faith ultimately strengthened it. Enjoy the show. All right, so we have Tom Derflinger, and he's a retired cop, and we talked a little bit. He's part of my small group at church, and I got to know him a little bit. And Tom, where are you from, man?
So I'm from a little place called Derby, Ohio, which is in Pickaway County. It's just south of Harrisburg, which is just on the edge of Franklin County and Pickaway County. So I grew up there as my mom and dad lived there really their whole lives. They both passed away several years ago now. And I moved when me and my wife got married. We moved to Commercial Point, just south of Grove City. We have 2 daughters. Have to really think about their ages now. They're both in their 30s. I've got 2 granddaughters. They're 12 and 8. I know those ages. Me and my wife have been married for, in October of next year, it'll be 40 years. So 39 years right now. And we're both retired now and getting ready to head to Florida for 3 months. And so that's kind of grew up in a small town and went to high school in Pickaway County. When I got my first job was my first real job was I worked at Mac Tools in Columbus until I was about 34. The company seemed like it was kind of going downhill and didn't really see much of a future there. I always had a interest in law enforcement. I had some friends that were in law enforcement. So while I was working at Mac Tools, I would work there during the day, and I started a police academy in Chillicothe on my own because I just didn't know what else to do to get into it. So I started an academy while I was working there. So I'd work my 8 hours at Mac Tools. I'd leave there and drive to Chillicothe, go to school for 4 hours in the evenings, get it done about 10 o'clock at night, come home, go back and do it again. Did this for 6 months.
Wow.
Just about every weekend on Saturdays and Sundays for 8 or 10 hours each day for 6 months, just because it was a field I was interested in. Didn't have a job yet in law enforcement, but was trying to figure out a way to get my foot in the door. So I did that I was in 90, started in 96 into 97. And then when I got out of the academy, I just started putting in applications all over the place, trying to get a foot in the door somewhere at a law enforcement agency. It was, I believe, August of 97, I got hired by the Highway Patrol. And they have 2 different divisions. So they have troopers that work the street, and then they had police officers, which I didn't know at the time. Troopers and police officers are a little different. Troopers are not police officers. They're strictly state patrol. So I had the whole police background, and that was the job I was working. But really, it was a glorified security job because we were either at the main place on Broad Street, the governor's residence, or the state house and the fairgrounds. And so I got stationed at the state house and started working there in 97. And I worked third shift most of the time there. I did probably my first year or so, I did on first and second shift just to get my training in and things like that. And the Highway Patrol had great training. It just wasn't, you were just guarding basically a building.
Right.
You know, we had the state buildings around there, the Supreme Court, the state office buildings, the senators and the congressmen and stuff like that. We were responsible for their offices. Any threats, any complaints, any problems in those buildings, we took the action on that stuff. And then anything that happened on the State House grounds, we took care of. I did a brief, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 months at the governor's residence when Voinovich was in office, and a little bit when Taft was in office.
Oh, that was a while ago.
Yeah, that was back in the late '90s.
Yeah.
So we had a little building. Our post was in the garage, basically in the upstairs of the garage. They had like an apartment, all the cameras and everything up there, and so we worked out of that garage when I was at the governor's residence, and just basically was security for them, just to make sure nothing happened while they were home. They had troopers that drove them around and stuff, but we were responsible for the property. In 2000, I decided I wanted to actually do police work and not just be a security guard.
You were bored with it?
I was. I mean, it was.
Yeah.
I had good training. You know, the patrol gave us good training, and I liked it. But I wanted to do something. I wanted to do police work. I didn't want to just sit and not do a whole lot of anything. So, one of my instructors when I went through the academy was the chief of police at Grove City, and I don't know that he actually thought anybody would take him up on this or not. But when he was our instructor, he was a very interesting guy, and he was probably my favorite instructor that I had at the academy, and he always said, you know, if you're ever in Grove City, stop by and look me up. So I saw they were hiring, and I was late in my age. I mean, I was 30, I think I was 33 in 2000, somewhere around there. And so I wasn't really sure whether there was an age limit.
Right.
You know, if they would even consider me or not.
Yeah.
So I saw they were hiring, and I just stopped in one day. I said, hey, could I speak to the chief? And told him who I was. He came down and got me. We went up to his office, and I just flat out asked him, I said, am I wasting my time putting in an application, or would you guys hire somebody that's, you know, 30, mid-30s?
Why do you think that is, Tom? I know that they do prefer younger officers. Do you think that's more of like to mold them, or do they think that maybe you're already set in your ways by that time?
I think a lot of it is that they want somebody that's going to be there for a long time.
Gotcha.
For the 25 years or
Gotcha.
whatever.
They don't want you to step in there and retire in 10 years.
That's my guess.
I gotcha.
So, yeah, I think that's the main reason.
Okay.
But, you know, when I first started getting into it, even the highway patrol, you had to be a certain height. You know, you had to look a certain way.
Right.
Just said, this is what we want, and this is what you're doing. So, but I went in and talked to him. I said, you know, I'm interested, but if it's going to be a waste of my time, I'll just stay where I'm at, you know. And he said, no, I don't think we have any age restrictions and anything like that. So I went ahead and applied with them. Back then, it has changed so much. My goodness, when I took the test, I think there was 350 of us that took the test. They hired 3 or 4 of us that year out of that 350. I mean, that was just the initial group. You weed out a lot, you know, through the process. But me and 3 other guys got hired that year in 2000. And so I left the patrol and went to Grove City, and that's where I really started actually getting to do law enforcement stuff.
Right.
You know, I had training, but I never got to really use those skills a whole lot. Just, you know, a little bit. But I think it worked out well, me being older. But I knew once I started in law enforcement that's what I was meant to do.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a good fit for me. And it took me a little while I was not really a nosy kind of person. I was
Yeah.
kind of, I do my thing, you do your thing.
Yeah.
But you had to be nosy
Right.
in order to investigate, in order to find things out. But I think me being older really was an asset.
Oh, yeah.
And my lieutenant even told me that one time, because
Yeah.
I told him, I said, I wish I'd have done this when I was in my 20s.
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, don't say that. He goes, think of all the experience that you've had, your life experience, coming into this job, and how much that's benefited you just having life experiences.
Right.
And I really found out that was true the farther along I got in my law enforcement career, because a couple years into it, and really they didn't do this often with new guys. They didn't let you be a field training officer until you had 5 years on or so. But I think because of my maturity, being a little bit older, they started letting me be a field training officer just a couple years into my career.
Yeah.
And it was, when I was training new guys, and most of them were young, they had no life experience whatsoever. And it's hard when you don't have life experience to be able to talk to somebody
Right.
about their problems.
Yeah.
And try and help them with their issues and what's going on, because you don't know.
Right.
You've just gotten out of high school not too long ago,
Right. So I can relate to that a little bit. When I worked in corrections, I was a supervisor.
Okay.
And I would rather have someone older, because I found a lot of the 20-year-olds coming in had a different idea what the job was.
Sure.
We were in a correctional facility, but it was more of a program. So we were talking people down, calming them down. We didn't want to use restraints and use of force. That stuff was frowned on where I was at, especially, as time went by. Yeah. So maybe is that what you're talking about? Like when you get the younger guys, they grow up watching Lethal Weapon, and they think that's what the job consists of. They're ready to go out and get some bad guys, right?
Yeah. Well, in the academy, so for anybody really, the academy, just you get overloaded with information because they've only got so long to give you all these laws, all the different things that you're supposed to know, the culpable mental states of people, which changes the one law could be, from one thing to another, whether they did it intentionally, whether they premeditated it or whether it was accidental. Right. Those all changed things. So you had all these different things that they're cramming into you in a 6-month period. And when you get out and you start working the street, you have no idea how to apply all that stuff.
Right.
It's just head knowledge,
yeah.
book knowledge.
Yeah, it's information.
It's not, you can know all that, but know how to apply it when you go out is something totally different. And that's really what it was and they had no life experience to draw back on, where I did, which I think helped me a lot in those areas. So it was good. I enjoyed being a field training officer. It was hard for me I'm a control freak. Most cops are, most law enforcement are. It was hard for me to let somebody else drive the car. It was hard to let them take charge of a scene, but it was good for me to be able to do that. But it was hard.
Yeah.
It was something I don't like. I didn't like. But how else is somebody going to learn unless you let them, unless you let them do it. So,
right.
So, yeah.
So what's some, I don't know, some crazy situations you've seen or experienced, and what'd you learn in those situations?
I don't know. I got to do a lot in my, I only actually worked the street about 10 years, and I'll tell you why here in a little bit, but I got to do background investigations, which I liked. I got to be an FTO. I was a firearms instructor. I was a taser instructor. I was one of our armorers so worked on the guns and things. And I was on our SRT team. So we didn't we didn't have a full-time team like Columbus just because we don't have the amount of call-outs to be a full-time strategic response team or SWAT team. That's
right.
Basically what it was. So we were a part-time team. That was a lot of fun for me. I enjoyed that, the adrenaline rush.
Oh yeah.
Most of our stuff was dealing with drug warrants and hitting houses because of that type of stuff, which was fun.
Yeah.
Most of the time I was the ram guy. So I was the guy that got to bust
nice.
in the door.
With the battering ram?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I was a pretty big guy. They normally give it to one of the bigger guys, and I used to work out. So I got to bust in a lot of doors, which was fun.
Yeah.
I remember a guy, we hit a house in Grove City that was a drug house, and he had a metal magnet about that long on the front door, and it was about that thick, and it was hard to get that door open because it was just a really strong magnet. So I was pretty proud about that. I got it open in about 4 hits.
Yeah.
Most of them I could get in 1 or 2. That one took a little time, but I got in. He had a whole, like, all of his drug stuff was in his garage area, and he had everything gated off with iron gates, iron locks.
Oh wow.
So once we got into the house, we had to get through all that stuff to get to the stuff. But we didn't do a whole lot. Our main job was just entry and clearing the house to make sure, nobody was there or we were arresting the people that were there. And then once we did that, I mean, our job was pretty quick on our SRT team. It was hit the door, go in, get everybody handcuffed, and then we turned it over to the detectives and we left. No paperwork.
Yeah.
It was great because you just got to do the fun stuff and hand it over to somebody else for the rest of it. One of the things I think was the most fun that I got to do on the SRT team was we had a multi-jurisdictional day where we went. There was a drug cartel from Mexico that we were that they were wanting to hit everything at one time. And these people had all kinds of places all over Columbus. So our Grove City team, we had like 3 locations that we hit. And then they had a team from Westerville, they had a team from Franklin County, they had a team from Columbus, they had a team from Upper Arlington. They had all the suburbs in Columbus all joined together, and we all hit all their stuff right about the same time so that they couldn't call each other. They couldn't let everybody know that, hey, we're getting busted here.
Yeah.
And it was just a whole day of knocking in doors, and we hit the Chi-Chi's restaurant that was on the west side of Columbus. That was one of their money laundering places. And we hit that one along with a couple other houses. But being a full-time SRT or SWAT guy, that would have been so much fun. But we didn't have that. We just had part-time.
Right.
But it was great. It was a very good experience. We got a lot of extra tactical knowledge and training because of being on the team. So we got to do a lot of different trainings that they sent us to and things like that, which we trained once a month, just the SRT team. And we were just constantly trying to think of new ways, to do things better. And, some of the things were really difficult if you had to actually do. We didn't have to, like bus assaults.
Right.
There's not a whole lot of places you can go down the middle of a bus.
Right.
Yeah. But luckily we didn't have to do things like that. But I got a lot of good training from that. They sent me to sniper school.
Wow.
After a while, when they were replacing one of the guys that was a sniper decided to leave, and so I took his spot, and so that was some extra training that whether I didn't actually ever get to use it, which was fine.
Yeah. So what would that look like? Like a sharpshooter and like a hostage negotiation thing?
Yeah, it would have been.
Like you'd put
somebody kind of an Overwatch type of thing. so we ran a lot of different scenarios and training where that might come into play, where you had somebody, in a house and you were out away somewhere with a scoped, we had a 700 Remington 700 308 is what we shot. And, so we trained with those, and, that training was through the Highway Patrol. And those guys the Highway Patrol, I think, has some of the top training anywhere, really. Those guys are physically fit. They made us run everywhere we went. When we did the training, you ran to your target. You got to walk back, but you had to run to your target. I can remember going to Chillicothe to the was it Fort Campbell or something. There's some fort down there off of it runs off of Bridge Street, but they had a 500-yard range, so we could go out to 500 yards to shoot, and they'd make you run to your targets. You'd shoot 3 rounds at 150 yards and run to your target, and then walk back, shoot another 3 rounds, run to your target. And you move out to 200 and out to 300, out to 400, run to your target, come back. And I came home one night, sat in my recliner, and had a Charlie horse just sitting there doing nothing from running all day long. But it was great training. I enjoyed it. It was a good experience for me. And as far as the police department went, I worked third shift most of my career. So most of the time I was dealing with domestics, bar fights, drunks, drug addicts, robberies, B&Es, things like that. That's what we were dealing with most of the time on third shift. And so it was interesting. All the shifts are different. You're always, sometimes you get held over to first shift.
Right.
And I remember driving one of the first times I got held over on the first shift, because nobody likes the cops on third shift for the most part, because we don't get to do anything. We just don't see the nice people out on the streets.
Right.
And I remember driving down the road one morning when I got held over, and somebody waved at me, and I was just looking at him like, what? I didn't even wave back, because I was stunned that somebody was actually being nice. Yeah. Because it wasn't something I was used to. And I tell you, after a while, that weighs on you. I mean, it really does.
Oh, yeah.
When I finally retired, it was just the relief, the stress that you don't even realize that you're under until you're done.
I worked third shift on and off for about 10 years, and I would get mandated into the first shift so much we called it thirst shift, because it was more of a combination of third and first, because it would be 16 hours.
Yeah.
And, man, the sleep that I lacked in that amount of time, man. I mean, I would be rolling on 3-4 hours of sleep most days. Yeah. And as I got older, man, I just couldn't bounce back from that. My days off, I would just sleep all day.
Yeah.
And it was Chris, my cameraman, editor, he's the one that told me I should black my windows out. It never even occurred to me. So I would go home at probably about, I want to say my shift ended at 6 a.m. I worked from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. was my normal scheduled shift. If I got mandated, I'd be there till 2 p.m.
Yeah.
But when I got home at 6 a.m., sometimes we'd get mandated for a half. So it'd 6 a.m., 10 a.m., or 2 p.m. But either way, I get home, and if I go to bed at 9, around noon, the sun starts peeking in. Your body wants to get up. You can't fight it, right?
Yeah.
But I bet when he talked me into blacking out my windows, I bet it saved 10 years of my life. I don't know until later, but you don't realize like how much sleep you're lacking until you start getting on a normal schedule again.
Yeah, you gotta have darkening windows.
Do you remember that, Chris? I was just basically napping every day for years.
Yeah. You got to have the darkening shades. You got to have sound machines.
Yeah.
To block out, my kids tried to be quiet during the day when they were home in the summer and things, but it's a whole different animal. And when I was working thirds, if we had court cases, we had to call in at like 10 o'clock in the morning, any day that we might have a court case, to check to see if we were needed to come into court or not. So I'd get off at 7:30. I'd get home, finally get in bed about 8:30, 9 o'clock. I have to wake up at 10, set my alarm to wake up at 10 to call in to see if I was needed for court.
Yeah.
So if I was needed for court, then I had to go to Columbus and come back, go back to bed. I might get an SRT call out.
Right.
So I'd have to wake up, go to that, come back. So I'd get 5 or 6 of broken hours of sleep throughout the day.
Yeah, it's better just to stay up.
Yeah, it was hard. And I hated for my kids to suffer because of my schedule.
Right.
So on my days off, I tried to stay up as long as I could.
Yeah.
And just if I didn't sit down, I was okay.
Right.
So I would just try to stay up all day long so that my kids had a dad at home.
Yeah, it was just a body though, right?
It was just a body half the time, but I'd go with them. And once I hit a soft couch or a chair, though, it was
next
over.
2 days.
Yeah, it was over.
I used to tell my wife, man, I said, just give me another minute. When she'd be waking me up for work or an errand or something I'd say, I promise we'll go. And just one more minute. Well, what's that going to do? It's going to do a lot for me for this next minute.
Yeah, exactly. You got that right.
1 minute.
Every minute counts sometimes, for sure. So
I feel your pain on that.
Yeah, but I very much enjoyed doing that job. It was just to me, it was what I was meant to do.
Yeah,
I felt like I was good at it. I was fair to everybody until you made me not be fair to you.
Right.
I mean, I was still fair. It was just I'm a nice guy until you make me not be nice.
Right.
And that was a little bit of a struggle as a Christian.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to step away from that to survive at times.
Right.
I mean, you have to compartmentalize that.
Yeah.
And I've talked to some guys. There's a guy at church that used to come to our small group, and he does a lot more stuff than I was ever into. And we had discussions about that because he was struggling with that.
Yeah. And
so I tried to tell him, man, you just gotta kind of separate those things sometimes.
Right.
In order to or it'll drive you crazy.
Yeah.
And it puts you in a dangerous situation.
Definitely.
If you don't compartmentalize that kind of stuff. But I felt like I did a good job of that.
What kind of situation you think would make you have to put that to the side?
Well, some people only understand in your face, belligerent, I'm badder than you.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Some people that's the only way that you're gonna.
I know what you mean.
That you're gonna survive with somebody.
Yeah.
The
nice
thinks
guy,
they're the baddest guy on the block.
You can't turn the other cheek in that situation. You got to be the hand. You got to be the fist.
Yeah, and I wouldn't normally talk or react to somebody.
Right.
As a Christian in that way.
Exactly.
But when it comes down to me or him, I'm going home at the end of the night.
Right.
And whatever that takes, whatever that looks like, and right, wrong, or indifferent, that's the way I had to deal with it.
Yeah. I know what you mean. So
that was probably, one of the harder things to have to get myself to do, because it was almost like I was somebody else.
Yeah.
But,
I do.
But I felt like I had to do that in order to go home that night.
Yeah. You had to get their respect,
Sure.
and you had to get the job done.
Yeah.
Right. So, and I always felt like when I was put in those positions, and I wasn't a cop, but I just felt like God had mercy in those situations because he guided my path into that role. There's a time for grace, there's a time for mercy, but there's also a time for force.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think that's definite. Definitely the way it goes. So,
and you said you were on the community relations. What was that?
So, let me tell you how I got there.
Yeah.
So in 2009, I was working the street, working third shift, working on the SRT team. We were doing an SRT training one day, one of our training days, and we were doing what I call a man down type of drill. So Franklin County, their training facility, they had a house that we could use for training. So we could do searches in it. We could put people in it, bust in the doors, whatever. The place was just, made to get we use simunition rounds.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So paintball rounds basically that fit
Yeah,
in
you
our
beat it
guns.
up.
So we did stuff like that all the time. And this particular day, it was in, I think, February of 2009, we were doing drills where there was somebody in the house, and we had officers down in places that they couldn't escape from, and somebody was shooting at them. So we were throwing Kevlar vests over the windows of the cruisers, ballistic blankets and things over the doors. We would drive up in between the gunfire and our guy, scoop him up underneath the arms, drag him into the back of the car, drive off. And that was the training that we were doing, how to rescue our guys if they were pinned down somewhere, and we were just all day long. You're just scooping somebody up underneath their arms, dragging them in the car and going. Well, the next day, and I don't bruise easy. Like, you got to beat me pretty good to get me to bruise. And the next day after that training, I was bruised from my armpit down to my waist. And I thought, yeah, that's kind of weird that happened, but I'm sure it was just from us being kind of rough with each other during the training or whatever. Didn't think a whole lot about it. Probably a week or so later, I started getting this lump underneath my left arm. And I assumed it was from the same thing. I had told our department about it, and they sent me workers' comp. They sent me to a doctor and had me checked out, and I told them what was going on when it happened. And they said, yeah, you probably got just a hematoma underneath there. It's filling up with blood. It'll eventually dry up, and it should be okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. So about a month later, it was even bigger. And a month later, it was even bigger.
Wow.
Until it was about the size of a baseball.
Man.
Underneath my left arm.
And you were just enduring it, just going to work.
Yeah. I mean, it was
ibuprofen. And
just thinking, it was going to
go
away
away
eventually. So they did a couple of ultrasounds and said, it's all we see. So about 3 or 4 months into it, they decided to send me to a surgeon. He cut it open, drained all the fluid out, sewed me back up, put a drain tube in me, and said, that should take care of it. But never ran any tests or anything like that, just thought that was it. Mm-hmm. Well, about 3 months later, it was back to the size of a baseball again. And so I was getting ready to go back to the guy who did the surgery on me. And the day before, I remember it was a Sunday, because I remember I was at church. And if I coughed or breathed hard, it just felt like somebody was just stabbing me in the chest on this side, on the opposite side, just like they were stabbing me with a knife. It was so painful. And so I went to the doctor the next day about my arm, and I told him, I said, I'm sure this is not related, but on this side of my chest, I just got that pain, and it's really, really unbearable. And he said, well, let me do a chest x-ray while you're here. We'll just see what's going on, see if I see anything. Well, he called me back later that same day, and he said, something doesn't look right. He goes, it almost looks like, the only way I could describe it is it looks like that one of your ribs is just chewed up. And he said, so I'm going to send you for a CAT scan, and we're going to get a better look at this. So they sent me for a CAT scan, and he came back and he said, it really looks like a tumor on your rib now that we've taken this CAT scan. And he said, you also have a pretty large tumor on your adrenal gland on your right side and a small one on your left side on your adrenal glands. And he said, so we're going to do a biopsy. He said, most of the time they're all benign. It's just, we got to be precautious and, just see what's going on. So, they scheduled me for a biopsy on my adrenal gland, because that was the largest one. And that was a trip, because they go through your back with a needle, about this long, and you're awake during this thing. They give you a sedative, but when he stuck that in, it was like my whole insides. It was like you deflated a balloon. It just was like shuddering on the inside of me, and I was like, "What in the world was that?" And he said, "Well, we went through your diaphragm," and so it basically was like popping a balloon.
Wow.
And so anyway, they did a biopsy, and they said, he called me, I don't know. So August is when they did the CAT scans. It was probably maybe the end of August. And he said, you have cancer. He goes, we don't know what kind you have, but the biopsy came back that you have cancer. So, which was pretty devastating, but still not knowing the extent of it.
Right.
Tried to take everything in stride. We're just going, we'll figure this out and move on. Well, so this was in August, and every call he said, we still don't know what it is. We don't know. We can't treat it until we know where it started or what kind of cancer it is. We can't there's so many different ones that react different to treatment. There's no way that we can treat you until we've narrowed down what it is. So they sent me back in for another biopsy, and they said, we still got the same results, but we're sending them. They sent my results all over the country, to Berkeley, to all these different places and all over the country. And nobody could figure out what kind of cancer I had. And he said there's like 4% of cancers that are just what they call it, unknown primary is what they called it. And he said that could be what you have. We just don't know. We can't determine what it is. So I had gone from August, really from February until now it's October, and the tumors are growing, and I have extreme amount of pain in my stomach from the tumors growing and pushing on organs and things like that. And one night in October, I woke my wife up and I said, you got to take me to the emergency room. I just can't. I can't take the pain anymore. They were giving me Oxycontin, oxycodone, and none of it was even touching the pain.
Right.
And so I said, just take me to the hospital. We got to figure something out. So she drove me to OSU, and I sat in the waiting room for about 4 hours before they finally got me into the emergency room. They took me in, ran a bunch of tests, admitted me. I was in the hospital for about a week. A couple blood transfusions, and at the end of that week, they said, we think that it is some sort of a melanoma, a rare melanoma. It was called a blue nevus type of melanoma. And they said, that's how we want to treat this. So I said, okay, whatever we got to do, right? So they said, we're going to schedule you with an oncologist to talk about what's going on. So I really didn't know, the full extent of this, other than, all right, I got some sort of cancer and we're going to figure out a plan to treat it. So a couple weeks later, I went and saw the oncologist, and just a fantastic lady. She's one of the main people at OSU, and she was no nonsense though. She didn't sugarcoat things, which I was glad of.
Right.
But me and my wife were sitting in the room, and she said, so what you have is very ugly. She goes, it is not curable. She said it's very bad. She said, you have about 13 or 14 or 9 or 10 different tumors in your body. It's stage 4, and I remember her saying, "I hope you have more good days than you have bad days."
Wow.
And me and my wife just looked at each other because we were just shocked.
Right.
I'd never really, I was one of the most healthy guys, never hardly was ever sick, no issues at all. Never went to the doctor. And here I am being told that, this is bad. And she said, we said, what's the prognosis for this? What's the outcome? And she said, she said the best case scenario is, I would say you might live 5 years, but it's not curable. So we were pretty shocked, pretty devastated at this. And she said, "When do you want to start treatment?" And I said, "Tomorrow." She goes, "Okay." So she scheduled me for chemo the next day. But everybody who looked at my results were just like, "This is not good."
Yeah.
And every time I went in to see her, I said, "When am I going back to work?" She goes, "You're not going back to work." She said, "You put in your paperwork," and I honestly think that they didn't really think I was going to live much longer than about 6 months.
Wow.
Because I don't know how much you know about the whole cancer and chemo thing, but back then they'd put a port in so that they didn't have to hit a vein, try to find a vein every time they gave you chemo. Well, they didn't even do that for me. They just found a vein, and every 3 weeks I was doing a chemo treatment. And it was a really strong chemo. It was, you'd spend the whole day there, but it was 4 hours, 3 hours of one bag and an hour of another bag through an IV. And I'd do it every 3 weeks. So I had about, the last week I felt somewhat better. So I'd have 2 weeks of just being sick and tired and didn't do anything. And then the last week I'd start feeling a little bit better just in time to go back for another round. And so I had to go see through my work in order to get disability. I had to go see a guy about, what I was able to do if I recovered from this. And I remember him looking at my paperwork, and he's just going, "I didn't know what to expect when you walked in here, because this makes it sound like you're already dead." And it was just a really horrific diagnosis.
Right.
And, so as a Christian, man, it was tough.
I bet.
At the time I was a deacon in our church, and I had been to a lot of people's houses and hospitals, people dying, and I'd sat with them and I'd told them, "Hey, you got a better place to go," And when it hit me, those words were not comforting whatsoever.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm just being honest.
Yeah.
I wish I was that strong.
No, I hear you.
That strong person that was like, okay, this isn't going to affect me whatsoever, but it did. And I remember everything I did. I mean, my family is the most important thing in the world to me. And everything I did I kept thinking, okay, this is the last Christmas I'm going to spend with my kids. This is my last anniversary. This is my last birthday. All these things I was doing. And I kept thinking, gosh, this is it. I'm not going to make it through this.
Yeah.
And I tried hard to keep up a good front for my kids and, for everybody else, but it was rough. Even though I knew I had a better place to go, it was just rough. And I apologize.
No, man, you're fine. I appreciate the honesty, Tom.
Yeah. And it was, I remember, I remember thinking, why me? You know, I'm a good Christian guy, got a good family. You know, why in the world am I having to go through this? Why is my family having to go through this? And in the meantime of doing my chemo, I started going to a doctor at OSU he was integrative medicine. And so he was all about your body being able to fight disease on its own to help out. And so he put me on a bunch of supplements, just fish oil, cinnamon, magnesium, calcium, all these different things. And I was taking, oh my gosh, I was taking 30 of those things a day. And he was actually a cancer survivor of about 3 different types of cancer. And he was all about what you eat. Put me on a gluten-free diet, basically, because he said gluten is huge in being able to, like, too much gluten is just huge in not being able to fight disease. Mm-hmm. And so he's all about the science of this stuff. So I started doing this, and I actually started feeling so much better. Like instead of being 3 weeks of feeling like crap, it was like 4 days, and I started feeling much better. And because of that, I got to take more chemo, which helped me because you go in the morning, they test your blood. If your levels your white blood count wasn't a certain number, they couldn't give you chemo. And so, but because I was doing both things, my numbers were doing better. And my oncologist once told me, she said, most people can only do about 10 rounds of this chemo because it just wipes your body out. I was able to do 26 and not 10, which I think was huge. But I just remember how I was bummed out. I was just thinking, why, God, is this happening to me?
Yeah.
And I read a book. Well, first I read this thing called "Don't Waste Your Cancer," and I can't remember the guy's name now. And he was talking about, as a Christian, don't waste this opportunity to give God glory in everything, right? No matter what you're going through, and take these opportunities to tell other people about how good He is. And I was reading a book by David Jeremiah, and the things that I was going through in my head with this, why me, this book was kind of making things clearer for me. And it was almost like God hit me in the head with a baseball bat and said, how selfish are you? And I started thinking, yeah, why not me? I mean, why am I so special? What makes me so different? Is it better for somebody who's not a Christian?
Right.
Or is it better for me as a Christian knowing where I'm going? Is that better for me? So why not me? Why not me instead of I had one of my best friend who's now chief of police in Grove City. His niece died at 8 or 9 years old of cancer. And I remember thinking, why not me instead of somebody like that? I'm 45 years old. I've lived a good life, and much better than a 7-year-old, or much better than somebody who's not a Christian. And when I started looking at that in that way, it changed everything. I was thinking, why am I being so selfish? I've had 45 years. I've got 2 great children. I've had a great marriage. I've had a great life. Why am I being selfish? Instead of dwelling on all the things that I'm going to miss, why don't I dwell on all the things that God's blessed me with? And when I started looking at it that way, everything changed. You know, I wasn't depressed. I wasn't thinking, okay, this is the last of this is the last of that. I was just thankful for everything, every moment that I had. And every time I went back for a scan, the tumors were shrinking. And I did this for a year and a half. I took chemo for a year and a half. And in May or June of, I think it was May of 2012 or 2011, they said, you don't have any more cancer. It's gone. Everything that you had in your body is gone. They said it doesn't mean it won't come back, but they called it no evidence of disease. You have no evidence of this cancer anymore in your body. So in less than 2 years from when they told me this is not curable, I didn't have any cancer, and I haven't had any since. I don't even go see an oncologist anymore. But how you deal with that with your attitude was so huge in getting through it and realizing that, you know, this is a disease that hits everybody, whether you're a Christian or whether you're not, it doesn't really matter. But how you deal with it and how others see you deal with it is a huge testimony. You know, in James, it talks about, you know, these trials that you go through and how you can count it joy. It was not fun going through chemo, but the result and the testimony that I have going through it, I'm so glad I went through it because it gave me a testimony that I could tell others about, you know, and how good God is. So that's kind of, I had to retire because of the cancer. But in 2012, I went back to Grove City, and they hired me on in a part-time position as the crime prevention coordinator. So I worked about 28, 30 hours a week. And my job was to kind of just go out into the city, help educate people on ways to stay safe, not be victims of crime, you know, signage, businesses, deal with businesses, things like that. And so I started back with them in 2012, and I did that for about probably 5 or 6 years until my supervisor retired. He was a sergeant at the time, and they wanted to make his position now a civilian spot. So I put in for that, and they hired me as the community relations supervisor. So that's how I ended up in the community relations department, is that I had already taken my disability through the police department, and so I couldn't go back. And I didn't really think that I should go back. Not that I didn't want to, but they took most of the lymph nodes out of my left arm. Mm-hmm. So if I get a splinter, I have nothing to fight infection in this arm. Mm-hmm. So I've been in the hospital multiple times with cellulitis because it's a skin infection. So if I get a splinter, if I get pricked by a thistle, anything can cause me to end up in the hospital. And I thought, how can I work, you know, fighting people, wrestling people, the things that I get into, how am I going to do that and not be constantly, you know, in the hospital over something stupid. Mm-hmm. So I had to retire from the police department, and but went back in a civilian position, and that's when I got to work, and I enjoyed that. It wasn't the same, but I got to do a lot of things with the community, and got to tell a lot of help a lot of people. I was really the only person to do active shooter response training for our city. I did it for businesses, did it for a lot of different things, but it just gave me a way to still be in touch with the police department, help out. And even though I was in a civilian role at that time, it still gave me an opportunity to work in that capacity, and I met a lot of good people and got to do a lot of good stuff even through that.
Yeah.
And so I did a lot of, public relations stuff with the media and things like that. So it was a good stint. I would have much rather been a police officer, but God had other plans. It is what it is.
Yeah.
But that's kind of where I'm at. I retired in 2021 altogether from the police department, and now I do a little bit on the side. I do some training for the state of Ohio for welfare workers, social workers. Adult Protective Services is one that I'm starting to get into. I just do some safety, security training for them, and I work maybe a day or so a week as an assistant maintenance guy with my daughter's work, and me and my wife travel a lot, and getting ready to head to Florida for 3 months.
Nice. Oh yeah, you told me that.
Yeah, so we're enjoying retirement now.
That's cool.
But
if Tom, if somebody that was in your situation is going through cancer, or maybe they just got the diagnosis today,
yeah,
what advice would you give them?
God's a big God, and put your faith in Him for sure. And I had people praying for me all over this country, and having the right attitude going into it. They didn't give me much of a chance at all, and I'm almost 15 years from when I was diagnosed, and I'm a miracle basically. So never give up, never stop trying. The entire time I was going through it, I never thought, and maybe this is just my type A personality, but I never thought that I wasn't going to survive it. Even though they told me I wasn't, in my head I never thought that way. I thought I'm going to do whatever needs to be done. If they said I needed a surgery, I did a surgery. If they said I need to do this, I said, okay, let's do it. Whatever it takes. And, just keeping that faith, having a good attitude. I think a good attitude is just huge. A good outlook. I think it's just huge in your whole recovery process. And, it is what it is. I don't know why God allows some people to be healed and some people don't. But, it's in His hands anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And, I figured, here's what I always said was, I'm going to do everything I can to get better. If God doesn't want that to happen, He'll take me.
That's it.
So I did everything that I could
Mm-hmm.
to get better.
Amen.
And if God had other plans, then God had other plans. But
Right.
I wasn't going to just give up and quit and not try to do what I could do.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that when it comes to surrender, if it's not to Him, then we're not supposed to. We only surrender to Him.
Yeah.
If it's anything else we can fight it, we should.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I know a lot of people think that, and that's really honest, Tom. Like,
Yeah.
why me? Here I am. I'm going to church.
I'm not proud
paying
of
my
it.
tithes, right? I mean, but that's a normal response. Even
It
people
is.
that aren't, even if they don't have faith, they think that, well, why me? Why am I going through it?
Yeah.
And I really appreciate you, man.
Yeah, no problem. I appreciate you having me.